Okay, an introduction, if you will, because my pilot episode, forgive the pun, received such positive feedback, including 40 views, 1 like, and 1 comment. I've decided to tentatively dedicate my time to a new series whereby I make your lives an absolute misery by talking about planes until you throw yourself into a puddle in a last-ditch effort to drown out the noise that is emanating from my mouth. So let me set the scene. You are on your way home from work. Your car is in the garage because you filled the tank with copious amounts of honey after getting sloshed during a work binge session, you silly cunt. Now look what you've done. You have to walk home. It's getting dark though, and you have to navigate this conveniently placed spooky alleyway. It's okay though, because you've navigated this alleyway many times before. Or at least, you think it's going to be okay, for you have been led into a false sense of security by the 43,600-pound T-12 Cloudmaker earthquake bomb. If you frequently find yourselves in situations like this, then this series might be for you. On that note, welcome to my Tedtholomew talk, B-36 Big Boy Edition. So, history has a weird way of forgetting about iconic aircraft that broke records or had a legendary reputation amongst those that flew them. They get no love and are seemingly cast to the dirt for being imposter planes that offered nothing more to the world, living in the shadow of people masturbating furiously over their successor planes. Because they featured in a film, or because Perry Spray in his infinite wisdom pretended he knew something about them, vomiting about how they were the best thing since sliced bread, despite the reality often being far more obscure. Granted, some of these hyped planes, like the ones pictured, are indeed exceptional aircraft, but they wouldn't be what they are today without the heavy influence from the real pioneers. Back in World War II, America was busy building many twin and four-engine bomber planes. Now you might be thinking to yourself, ah yes, the B-17 Flying Fortress, or the B-29 Super Fortress. But jelly spoons, you have much to learn, for you underestimate the World War II America's ability to produce way more types of bomber plane than feasibly necessary. You have the B-24, B-32, B-26, XB-15, XB-19, B-25, B-26, B-18, A-20, and the Lockheed Hudson. And the B-23. I included the Martin Maryland, but looking at it, it looks like it's got an RAF round along the side, so I feel like I might have made a mistake on that one, but fuck it, YOLO. You get the idea anyway. America had a lot of bomber planes. However, they all had one thing in common. They couldn't really fly very long distances without running out of fuel and falling flat on their face as a consequence. America needed something big, something huge, massive even, in order to keep the peace. America needed the B-36. This is the big boy. I coloured it in myself. It's not 100% accurate. It probably looked a lot less like someone sneezed and snotted all over its midsection, but I reserve the right to creative colour choices, so fuck you. This is my presentation, not yours. At the time, this was one big beastie boy. One of the largest bombers in America's fleet at the time was the legendary B-29. It was a big plane. Its length is a whopping 30 meters, making it larger than your average swimming pool, if your average swimming pool is 25 meters in length. By contrast, the B-36 was over 49 meters in length and had a wingspan that dwarfed almost everything during its time in service at over 70 meters. In fact, here is the prototype next to the B-29, but to really hammer it home and make you feel like a small insignificant speck on Earth, this is the B-36 next to a bunch of people. It should come as no surprise then that the B-36 had and still has the largest wingspan of any combat aircraft. Not only that, the B-36 Peacemaker was basically America's first freedom wet dream since its independence. The B-36 was an intercontinental nuclear bomber, and the world was at the mercy of its radioactive penis, as nobody else had this capability during the time of its inception in 1946. And for all intents and purposes, this arguably marked the beginning of America BTFOing the competition in international air dominance. During its inception, the prototype B-36 was a sight to behold. It was also very fucking weird. Not only was this plane huge, but it also incorporated an odd piston engine arrangement, which helped allow it to achieve long ranges. Unlike many World War II aircraft, the B-36 utilised a pusher-prop layout, meaning the spinning blades of ultimate doom, death and destruction were on the trailing edge of the wing. Under normal circumstances, like on this Avro Lancaster bomber I found earlier, the prop blades would be positioned in front of the wing. This is also referred to as the tractor configuration. There's a few reasons for the engine placement on an aircraft, including weight, cooling, aerodynamic efficiency and safety, and I'm not going to bore you to death with the details, but for this particular situation, the pusher-prop design was preferred. However, that didn't stop Convair, who produced the B-36, to propose the YB-36C, which had a tractor configuration. You'll see a lot of that in future. Convair was a bit of a loose cannon back in the day. Can't say I blame them. I'd probably get involved in this kind of shit myself if I had the chance. But to complicate matters further, B-36D and its successor variants used jet engines in addition to the prop engines. Because shit's already weird, might as well whole arse it in the weird division, I guess. There was some logic to it though, as it improved the B-36's top speed and allowed it to take off from smaller runways. It also was a bit redundant during actual cruising because the jet engines would turn off and thus create more drag, but that's a conversation for a different day. But basically, long story short, the catchphrase for this plane became 6 turning and 4 burning, at least when this variant first came out. So you get the idea, plane's a bit fucked in the head in the engine department. Except, there's more. Now, I don't know whose idea it was, but some engineer somewhere, honest to God, looked at this plane and went, mate, you know what this needs? Fucking tank tracks. And then they put tank tracks on it, because why the fuck not? Apparently they envisioned this thing landing in fields. I say landing, it's probably more like ploughing the fields. God knows why. I don't think anything would have been left of the poor field if this thing decided to land in it, but needless to say, this idea was quickly abandoned, but didn't stop them producing at least a proof of concept like depicted in the picture here. Notice the giant gouges in the earth behind it. So you're probably thinking to yourself at this point, thank God that's all over and you don't have to cast your eyes on the B-36 again, but once again you've been misled by the charm of the B-36. This is the NB-36H. I appreciate this picture is a bit, how do I say this, pixelated. But can we get a better image? Well, your boy's quite good at hacking the mainframe, so there it is. A better image, but look, what's that on the tail? Enhance the image. Oh God. Oh fuck, no, fucking no, good lord. The prophecy was true. Oh shit. Oh! Allow me to explain. You've heard of pusher props, you've heard of jet engines and for whatever reason putting tank tracks on the landing gear, but now get ready for nuclear-powered aircraft. I'll be honest, I think someone took their school science project a bit too far on this one. Aside from a redesigned lead-lined cockpit, the NB-36H was indeed intended as a nuclear-powered aircraft. The aircraft did fly to test out various items, but never flew as a completed unit, although the engines with the HTRE reactor were both built. But before it was all slapped together into one huge radioactive accident waiting to happen, they decided that maybe, just maybe, flying one of these things wasn't the best idea in the world. So the project was, perhaps sensibly at the time, abandoned. And thus the NB-36H was no more. However, one can't help but wonder what such an aircraft might look like now. But I guess we can dream. If that wasn't disturbing enough, the B-36 had a reconnaissance variant, the RB-36. You see, to nibble on them succulent long ranges, much like the Thnx missile from the pilot episode, the aircraft had to fly at high altitudes, about 43,000 feet to be exact. Not massively high by today's standards, but for its time it was considered pretty good back in the day, which of course made it perfect as a reconnaissance aircraft. The RB-36 had its bomb bay doors modified to carry a range of cameras, but most notably out of these, the Boston camera, which at the time was a pretty epic piece of equipment. Many people think that their phone camera surpasses the technology of the 1950s, and to the most extent that is true, by default I guess. But this chonk would, and I kid you not, capture an image of a fucking golf ball on Earth from 45,000 feet. In conclusion, it is entirely possible that somewhere out there, an RB-36 has taken a detailed aerial shot of an unsuspecting victim taking a shit. And this was in the 1950s. Let me reiterate, the 19-fucking-50s. And people think Russia is being clever by cheapskating their $100,000 Orlan recon drones with, and I kid you not, consumer-grade DSLR cameras, because it's just the same as the American stuff. Yes, and I bet you think Santa Claus paints his house with tartan paint while wielding a fucking left-handed screwdriver, you dumb cunt. In fact, I challenge this excuse of a reconnaissance drone to take a detailed area picture of a man having a poo from 8 miles away. I guarantee the Boston camera will win by default. In fact, I promise you it will win by default. Especially with that fucking excuse of a telephoto lens on the camera. Now unfortunately, rants aside, the B-36 was a victim of its own design, and no matter how many jet and nuclear engines were Pritt-sticked onto its wings, nothing would change the fact that this was, at its core, a World War II aircraft. One should look no further than the flight engineer's cockpit to work that one out. But the saga isn't over yet. While the jet age was coming into full swing and the B-36 was indeed becoming quickly obsolete, it no longer had the speed and altitude advantage, but Convair, being the Frankenstein scientists and madmen they were, created the following abomination. This is the YB-60, and I may or may not have coloured in this picture too. It was essentially the unofficial competitor to the B-52 Stratofortress, which is the sort of trademark American bomber that you tend to see in films and documentaries in the modern day. It was a cheap and, because it shared most of its components with its predecessor, the B-36, with most of the changes surrounding the wings and tail, mainly for increased speed, detect these swept wings and that kind of jazz. I'm not going to go into too much detail, that's a story for another time. But out of the YB-60 and the YB-52, pictured at the bottom there, the YB-60 was, on the face of it, the best one, strangely, on the face of it. It sported a very cheap price tag and a bomb load capacity of £72,000 compared to the YB-52's £43,000. 2 YB-60s were built and both were accepted by the Air Force in 1954, only to be scrapped in July of the same year. Sadly, the YB-60 was again a victim of its heritage. Old flight controls carried over from the B-36 made for terrible handling at higher speeds, and the considerably fatter airframe naturally made it slower than the much more lower-profiled B-52. Sadly, that was it for the B-36. After that, the aircraft was retired in 1954 and largely faded into obscurity, never to be seen again outside of those that visit the last few remaining in museums across America. It did, however, leave a few parting gifts in the form of missing nuclear bombs scattered across America that were dropped out of the plane, never to be found again, and the old 6 turning 4 burning adage was modified to the 2 turning, 2 burning, 2 smoking, 2 choking, and 2 more unaccounted for during its time in service because of how unreliable its engines were. And in addition to that, the B-36 never really saw active combat. But, in a weird way, the B-36 Peacemaker lived up to exactly that in its name. It kept the peace, and arguably cemented America's position as a world leader in military aviation. And on that note, that concludes this presentation on the legendary B-36 Peacemaker. They also tried to make an airliner version,